Good afternoon. On behalf of Engineers Australia, I'm delighted to welcome you all to our Thought Leaders series, Cybersecurity in the Railway Sector. My name is Amanda and I will be your host for today. Firstly, in keeping with our custom, Engineers Australia acknowledges the traditional custodians of the country throughout Australia and recognises their continuing connection to land, waters and community. We pay our respects to them and their cultures and to elders past, present and emerging. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge that today's webinar is being hosted with Engineers Australia's industry partner, Certifa Australia. Certifa has a global presence with 24 offices around the globe, located in Europe, Asia, Middle East, Africa, Latin America and Oceania, with projects in more than 50 countries, 500 ongoing projects and a network of more than 650 experts. With Certifa, you can draw from the experience of a global business that has been supporting the delivery of some of the most complex railway projects in the world. Certifa is supported in today's event by Cylus. Cylus is a global leader in rail cybersecurity, providing advanced solutions to protect mainline railways and metro companies from a wide array of threats and risks. Leading rail companies and operators use Cylus One to prevent safety incidents and service disruptions caused by cybersecurity events without requiring any modifications to the network. The company was founded by seasoned experts in cybersecurity, machine learning, traffic management, signalling and onboard train systems, and is currently protecting some of the largest rail systems around the world. Today, we will hear from expert speakers, followed by an insightful panel discussion and audience Q&A. And I encourage you to send questions through to our speakers via the chat box. And I'd like to welcome our first speaker for today, Hugh Hunter. At Certifa, Hugh provides independent safety assessment, independent certification and safety assurance roles for various railway infrastructure, systems and rolling stock projects across Australia. As part of the ISA work, Hugh is involved in the assessment of cybersecurity artifacts and deliverables. Prior to moving into systems engineering and safety assurance roles in the railway, during this period, Hugh was involved in cybersecurity, addressing vulnerability assessment and hardening of the software, hardware and network. Hugh will be joined by Yaniv Mallet. At Cylus, Yaniv provides services to railway companies and projects, focusing on solving practical problems and designing the right architecture to keep the clients on safe tracks. Prior to Cylus, Yaniv served as a lead software engineer for the Cyber R&D division of the Israel Defense Forces Elite Technological Unit. With over 20 years of experience in software engineering, communication systems and management of complex cybersecurity software and hardware projects. Please welcome Hugh Hunter and Yaniv Mallet.
We'd like to thank Engineers Australia for allowing us to come and do a presentation on cybersecurity in the railway industry. Cybersecurity is a hot topic worldwide, with attacks being performed against multiple domains. Over the past 5 years, there's been a major increase in the number of attacks on railway systems, with a number of denial of service and ransomware attacks being announced. The railway industry is clearly a target for cyber criminals, and it's hard to defend due to the inherent geographical distribution. And technologically speaking, the railway systems are designed with safety and availability rather than any focus on security. The railway becomes more of a target now as it starts to move to computer-based systems using IP protocols and wireless communication and networking. This presentation provides an overview of why cybersecurity is important in the railway industry, highlighting attacks which have been executed in railways and asking the question as to whether your systems are protected with your railway network and assets being monitored for attacks. For the panel, we have myself, Yaniv and Yaniv, who have railway experience and they're from Cylus. And we've invited along Chris Menon to provide further context and a comparison of railway cybersecurity with his overall experience as a lecturer in the topic and his vast experience of cybersecurity in the defence domain. The agenda for the presentation includes an introduction, which gives an overview of cybersecurity foundations. We then ask, is rail a target? We'll look at attacks that have been performed in railways and their impact, and we describe why railway networks are hard to defend. For cyber attacks in a railway, we're looking at various methods that are used for hacking railway systems. For railway cybersecurity regulations and mitigations, we're looking at the usage of the new Senelec standard EN 50701. And the last part, we look at what support does the railway industry need. We're looking at what operators and suppliers need to do to address cybersecurity issues. For introduction of foundations, as part of the introduction to the presentation, the next slide is going to provide some details on what is cybersecurity together with its foundations. Firstly, let's ask the question is, what is cybersecurity? Cybersecurity is the practice of protecting systems, networks, and programs from digital attacks. These cyber attacks are usually aimed at accessing, changing, or destroying sensitive information, extorting money from users, or interrupting normal business processes. And this also can have a massive safety impact, obviously depending on the type of attack being performed. Now, looking at the foundations of cybersecurity, when we're talking about managing cybersecurity, this isn't just plugging in new technology. So we've got 3 areas of focus we'd like to identify. The first one being people. People drive the cybersecurity processes using the provided technology. All staff have to be trained and made aware of possible attacks. It's not just the cybersecurity team. All staff actually have a duty regarding attacks on cybersecurity. For example, plugging in USB drives, opening email accounts together with possible malware, etc. Companies also have to have competent resources to manage the ongoing cybersecurity work. Now we'll look at processes. Processes have to be defined and put in place for the management of cybersecurity. For example, we need to look at things like penetration testing, software and system patching to get the latest patches, multi-factor authentication, safe network design, hardening, etc. The last part is technology. Obviously, technology has to be introduced to enable the management of cybersecurity. For example, things like the use of network segregation, firewalls, security operations center to act as a central command post. Also, the use of things like intrusion detection and intrusion protection systems. So with these 3 areas of focus, then we have the possibility to manage cybersecurity within our organizations. In this section now, is rail a target? We're going to address the question is whether rail is actually a target. We'll go on to look at the question of if it is a target, then also why is it very hard to defend? This slide is just a sample of real world events in various worldwide published headlines. If we look at some of these headlines, we can see evidence of railway attacks, including hackers disrupting train movements, for example, to aim to stop the movement of Russian troops. Multiple cyber attacks confirmed last year in UK rail. Chinese hackers penetrating the New York Transit computer systems. As I said, these are just some headlines from various attacks that have happened. But as you can see from this covers the rest of the world. But what about Australia? So if we start to look at some Australian examples, quite recently in Victoria, anyone who was a past asset user was informed that past assets was offline for at least a few days due to a cybersecurity incident, and that further status communication is going to be provided in the days to come. If we look over at New South Wales, there is an article recently, early in May, in governmentnews.com.au website, and it stated, in February last year, there was a global attack on the Acilian file transfer, and Transport for New South Wales have confirmed they've had data stolen. In July last year, there was a report from the New South Wales Auditor General who raised concerns that Transport for New South Wales and Sydney trains were not managing their cybersecurity risks effectively. Also, Transport for New South Wales revealed that in April this year, its authorised inspections scheme online was attacked, and third party successfully accessed a number of the AIS users' accounts, where AIS is a system that allows examiners to ensure a minimum safety standard for vehicles. So these are just some small samples of cyber attacks within Australia, and we can now see it's clear that rail is actually a target worldwide, and Australian rail is actually part of the target.
Yeah, thank you, Yu. So following the slide that you just presented, what we see here is a timeline of the last year's attacks, known attacks on ICS, which are the infrastructure command systems and control systems. So, in fact, critical infrastructure. And we can see various attacks from 2009 until now. And I think that on your left, you will see that the first event we put on this slide is the Stuxnet attack, because this is basically the big bang of the ICS hacking events. In fact, it was targeting SCADA systems in the Iranian nuclear program, and it's not that railway related, but from that point, we started to show attacks from different actors in the world, and we can see that it's increasing. I mean, it's pretty different from the IT, which are the information technology systems, so the system that we all using all on a day-to-day basis. So what we're calling the OT, operational technology systems, refers to technology who are controlling things in the physical work, like industries, plants, and railways. We need to understand what can be the impact of an attack on the railway network or railway system. What we can see on this slide is basically 4 categories of what can be the major impact from an attack that will go to a railway line, railway system, railway networks. So the first thing, of course, is the things that we all are working for in the railway industry, which is the safety of our passengers, safety of our staff, of the equipment. Of course, attacking a system that is impacting the movement of the train, movement authorities, the points on the tracks can have a fatal impact, like injuries and fatalities. But having said that, I think that the other categories are pretty important to understand also, because downtime, it's maybe only money, but that's the thing that is impacting the whole reputation, the whole business, and you don't want to be the company or the operator that will be known as the one that was under attack and have day-to-day delays of trains, cancellation of trains, and such. The loss of sensitive data, as we know from regular IT systems, is also pretty important, because it can be not only passenger related, but maybe sensitive data as passwords of your staff, of your IT staff, and that will be the beginning of another attack. And the last point is compliance. We will see in the few slides that compliance is starting to be, compliance and regulations are starting to rising in the railway industry for cybersecurity. And we all know that not complying to regulation can have business, at the minimum, business impacts and result in fines. What I want to show you now is just a basic example, like the one that you won't think about when thinking about cybersecurity impacts. What you see here is a real-life screen from Deutsche Bahn in Germany in one of the underground stations. It was a few years ago, and it was when the WannaCry ransomware was a very popular attack by hackers at these days. And we can see the passenger information system, the PIS, and in the middle of it suddenly pop up a really big, scary, red little window, which was in fact the ransomware. And people who were on the station didn't understand what is this, because I guess the text is really small. And this attack caused an issue because there was a mass passenger movement. All were trying to leave the station quickly because they didn't realize that something is going on. And they won't understand if it is maybe a terrorist attack or safety issues, but this led to a congestion issue for passenger. So the goal of the attackers wasn't to get inside the internal systems that are affecting the stations, but they managed to do it. By the way, it was totally by fortune, and the side effect could be safety related. So that's an example of how an attack that wasn't harming directly safely can result in such a thing. What we need to explain when talking about rail networks is what is so specific, what is so difficult to defend. I mean, we all see on a day basis the number of cyber attacks in the news. We all see the number of technologies, the number of startups in the world that are being created for cybersecurity. And what is so special inside our industry? First of all, I think we have a geographical issue. Okay, obviously, this is a challenge, a physical challenge and a logical challenge to manage a railway, because the assets are really, really on a very large geographical distribution. I mean, if you want to protect a nuclear plant, you can set the buildings and set around the perimeter and start with the physical defense, and then all of the cybersecurity defense. But when we are talking about long lines for hundreds of kilometers, and all along the line, you will have assets. So this is one thing. Second thing, that you're going to have a lot of interfaces with other systems and infrastructure, meaning your line isn't the only one maybe on the tracks. Maybe you have intersection, you're going to have some other cities and governmental system that you need to connect to, and each one of them is a challenge from the cybersecurity point of view. And the next point is that most of our assets are moving. They are moving along. So think about the way you're protecting your laptop. Okay, maybe you get this morning a Microsoft advisory to update and restart the laptop because there was some 0-day or some vulnerability found by Microsoft. You cannot do this on a rolling stock that is running in the middle of its journey. Second thing that is really specific to the rail world is the technology. All of our networks have a combination of systems from multiple vendors, on onboard system, wayside system, at the stations. Each of those vendors have a different approach to technology and to cybersecurity. So the complexity of this is that we need to understand how to control the security with different vendors and different technologies. Another thing is that those vendors are developing their system, and that's a good thing. But each one of their communication protocols are not like the known public communication protocols worldwide. They are specific for railways. Most of the time, they are specific for each vendor. Not all of them are IP-based protocol, as we know from the real world. And regular IT system will not recognize all of these protocols as they do on a regular network. When we're looking at safety, okay, and operations, I think all railway systems were designed with safety in mind. But safety and cybersecurity are not the same all the time. I mean, safety is used to refer to conditions of providing protection from aspects that are likely to cause harm. They are both deliberate and accidental sequence of events. Cybersecurity is the practice of protecting system, networks, and programs from digital attacks. That's not really the same. So these cyber attacks, they are usually aimed at accessing, changing, or destroying sensitive information, maybe extorting money from users or interrupting normal business processes. And there is an overlap because cybersecurity can lead to affect safety. If someone is managing to changing the regular way some program or some system is working, this can affect safety. So we have also fail-safe mechanism in the railway. That's something that we will talk about in a minute. But the last category I want to touch is the operational issues. When we're looking at the nature of our railway systems, one of the major challenges is that field elements are organized in security levels, okay? And you cannot change everything, not security, sorry, safety levels. Security levels is what we want to do in cybersecurity, and you cannot change a security level as you can do in an IT system. I mean, when was the last time that you made a software update on a computer who is in SIL 4 safety level? It's really complicated to monitor also all of those assets. And you are working on a lot of legacy and obsolete system because of that, because you cannot change them all the times. And that makes a lot of complexity for the cybersecurity management that we know from the regular networks. I think that the next slide will give you an overview about all of these topics, because you is going to ask you a nice question.
Okay, so the next point, we'd just like to, based on the slides up until now, where we've identified that railways are under attack, the attacks are beginning to come into Australia. So let's take a minute then to ask the question to the audience of, are you under attack? And for that, I would ask the following questions then. How many assets do you have? Can you actually monitor your assets? Are you able to manage all your asset communications? When was the last time you scanned your network for vulnerabilities? How are you monitoring existing assets or new assets? So you should keep these points in mind, and we're going to look to address these towards the end of the presentation and provide answers.
This next chapter, we want to get a taste of what are cyber attacks in the railway environment. We have now seen that as other domains, the railway industry is also under threat from a cybersecurity attacks. Let's have a look at maybe before we drill down at the categories of people of what we are calling the threat actors, who are those entities that can, want, or interested at attacking our network. The first category is what we call in the cybersecurity community the script kiddies. I mean, those are the hackers that you see on TV series. They're going around the internet really playing. Hackers are players, and they want to make a name for themselves or just trying something. These guys, they have some basic skills in hacking, a very, very opportunist way of working, and they're just moving around the internet and trying to make some success. This is not the most scary category of people from a safety perspective. The next category, I think it's what we really call hackers. They can be alone, they can be part of crime groups, they can be looking to make money, maybe they are part of activist groups and trying to promote political goals or disrupting some organization like a railway. And these guys, they are skilled. They are really hackers or attackers with experience. Some of them can have payroll. They can be on the payroll of some group, and they will have some tools and procedures, and they can be much more dangerous. But I think that the category of attackers that we are really need to be afraid of is what we call APTs. APTs is advanced persistent threats. They are groups monitored by international organizations, governmental or non-governmental. They are doing hacking as a profession. That's their work. They are fully prepared. They have operations. They have training. They are developing their own tools. They have methods, processes, and they're getting money to make it happen. This can be intelligence agencies all over the world. This can be crime syndicates. They can be military organization. But what we need to understand is that they are really skilled. They have patience. This is not the kind of hacker that will send a ransomware just to make some money. There will be a month or even years on their target, trying to get the right access to understand where is the point in the network that they can make the maximum damages, and also they will be able to wait for the day that they will need to make their attack count. So now that we understand much of the actors, I want us to take a look at this regular diagram. I think most of us will recognize a common railway architecture, okay? And we can see that there are multiple subsystems. Some of them are on track, some of them at other stations. But we can find here different system and different network architecture. This is just an example also of the sensitive operational area, not the other system that are helping running the rail also. And what I want us to do is like take a better look on the next slide at how will a hacker look at this kind of diagram. And what it will do is trying to identify the places that can be the entrance to our network, or maybe the places that you want to go there. And what we are seeing here in different colors, you can see in purple. I mean, if I was trying to attacking this network, the first thing I will see is the purple circle, which is obviously some wireless connection. So I don't know what is this wireless connection, but as the attacker, this is the first place that I maybe will want to check, because this is in the wild. I mean, I can be next to a trackside, next to the tracks with my truck and trying to understand what is going on in this wireless network. I don't need to get inside the OCC or inside the secured facility to understand if I can breach this connection. So maybe this is one of the first things they will look. Another thing they will take a look at are the yellow circle, because those are system and servers inside the OCC. And this is much more easier for a hacker because they have known vulnerabilities. I mean, those servers and IT system, some of them are regular commercial products. Some of them will run regular operating systems as Linux or Windows. And it's really, really easier for the hacker to get a footprint at one of those systems. Another thing I will see is that all of those systems are connected in some backbone network most of the time. And maybe this is the place I want to be to get ahead of each one of the systems. Another thing that it's important, as you see, we have field devices. field devices, and we talked about the geography a few slides before, meaning that there can be physical access to multiple facilities. Okay, think about maintenance operations, think about all of the wayside posts and facilities that are unmanned. And for an hacker, it can be the entry point. And each one of those systems also have open threats, okay, because we are buying them from some vendor. So each one of those vendors, they are part of what we're calling the supply chain, and the supply chains can also be a threat for cybersecurity. Last thing I want to point to is the maintenance. I mean, we have possible issues going on with maintenance. Maintenance can be an on-site technician. It may even not be related to the railway system. Okay, think about the air conditioning technician, or maybe another system technician inside the OCC. Those guys are going around with laptops. Okay, maybe some of them can have access to one of the network ports and plug in a laptop. And we have also a lot of remote maintainers connecting to our network, even inside the most critical parts, because since the last 2 years, we had COVID and a lot of vendors cannot access our facilities. So this is now a common practice. And we have to ask ourselves if this VPN that we open to the vendor for the maintenance can be attacked, can be breached, and what can be the damage that result from the breach of this VPN. So before we going through example of attacks, another point I want to emphasize. One of the easiest attacks for an hacker is what we call DOS, denial of service attacks, which is meant to just disrupt or shut down a system, a machine, because I overloading it, or because I is getting too much of requests. And the hacker will not have access to the data. It will not manipulate the data, but it will just shut that down. And the thing is that in the railway technology, we have a great thing, which are the fail-safe mechanism. It is great because this is safe. I mean, think about it. When you are inside an airplane and there is some problem, if you cannot have fail-safe mechanism. But when you are on a train and one of the system is detecting an anomaly, it can use the fail-safe mechanism. So this is really good that you can shut down system and break the train on tracks before something happened. But think about the fact that if an attacker knows that, he can just have denial of service attack. I will not talk about all of the system possible, but let's say maybe only the wireless connections for the train management system. Okay, let's say someone is running an interference and making a denial of service. You will have trains stopping each time this interference is going on. So it is really safe, but this means that it will affect your business. You can have fines from the regulator, and it will have a great reputational issues, because think about if every morning at 9 o'clock and then 10 o'clock, all of your trains stop for 5 minutes until the OCC understand that it is safe to continue. Maybe your passengers will choose to take the bus on the other day, and maybe you will have days to understand what is going on. So I think that in cybersecurity, our highest goal is always to prevent the attack that will physically harm people. But if someone will try to make a bad reputation or to affect your business, this is one of the techniques that we'll use. And we will now try to drill down in some example of attacks. Then you will start with one of the interesting kind of attacks we have.
As Yaniv said, we're now going to start to look at some examples of possible attacks. So looking at the most common, firstly, we'll look at the most common source of breaches, which is human error. So managing networks, IT and security is becoming more and more difficult as we're moving towards larger and more complicated networks and systems. Other reasons behind the complexity are due to the advanced services that our systems are now offering and the fact that we're now deploying large multi-vendor environments. Errors in configuration can and do happen, and they can cover items such as simply connecting a computer to the wrong network socket, through to examples of making mistakes when updating firewall rules. This slide here actually shows a manager wishing to connect to the OCC video wall. He has done this with his computer connected to an administrative network. So this is creating now a possible connection between the two different networks and a possible attack then from the administration network into the OCC network. Other attacks may occur when we actually ask users into our network to perform functions such as remote maintenance. This opens doors to an attack if we don't adequately control it. So the key lessons here for this type of attack are: 1, people make mistakes. This is why we have to have fail-safe mechanisms for network security. This is what we're calling defense in depth. Errors can expose the more secure network at its perimeter, the outside. It's quite a common approach where people who design a secure network believe that the perimeter is secured, and they will not implement extra defense mechanisms inside the network. They believe we cannot be attacked. The secure network is always not a true statement. Also, systems are being updated and changes made, and we need to tightly manage those changes through some form of change management process. We need to watch what we're changing and control it. Going on to the next slide, we'll look at another source of attack, which is actually an impersonation attack. So the concept of this targeted attack is based on exploiting an authorized access path channel. So taking examples of social engineering, including things like phishing attacks, stolen data to gather credentials. Credentials can be gathered from anyone who has access to our networks. So this includes permanent members of staff, suppliers, maintainers, anyone who has access to our network. With regards to companies having remote access to our networks, we can ask the following questions. Should a vendor find out there has been a leak of employees' credentials for people who have access to our network that they are employing, how long will it take before a vendor actually then discloses this information to us, if indeed he does disclose it? And taking a second question, how long is it going to take an attacker who now has these credentials to actually get into our network before we've actually then closed the loophole? So looking at authorized personnel impersonation, it's partly covered by the previous point in social engineering, but we all have suppliers and maintenance contracts with vendors. Often vendors have access to equipment for remote maintenance through outside internet channels. Those channels are often based on a secure VPN. But how secure is a VPN? What happens when a hacker is targeting one of the vendor's employees and he manages to steal the credentials? He can now have unauthorized access into our network. Right, the next slide is looking at ransomware. Ransomware attacks are one of the biggest issues in cybersecurity and can be used by attackers to disable complete systems and complete networks. Although a nice attacker will allow you to get your systems back if you pay them a nice ransom. Common effect of the attacks are the ransomware encryption applied to things like ticketing and billing systems. This is quite common. How long will we actually run systems as operators if we're not actually then going to receive income for our operational railway? As I said, this is quite a common attack through the world at the moment. Thousands of companies are hacked each year across multiple domains, and millions of computers are actually affected by ransomware. In our industry, the threat is relevant to all of the computers and servers we have. Let's not forget that the dedicated OT services and systems we're actually having are actually controlled and monitored by workstations, HMI, and servers, all of them running regular operating systems which can be attacked. Any infected device in our in our network and our internet-facing networks can receive and spread ransomware throughout our network, spreading the destructive effect of the ransomware. A lot of operators running networks believe that they have air-gap separation, but it takes a littlest opening between networks to let ransomware continue forward and propagate through our networks. Note that air-gap systems are going to be covered in the next slide. Multiple methods can be used by attackers to infiltrate networks, including social engineering, network sniffing. The attackers will find ways to infiltrate our network if they exist, and they're trying hard enough. We can implement ransomware fail-safe mechanisms which may close down complete systems and networks to avert the attack. That is a hard way to do it, but it's basically closing down systems, which again we might not want to do. So this may beat the ransomware attack, but it has an adverse effect on the operation of the systems we're running. Going on to air gap. So firstly, a word for us that are not familiar with the term air gap. An air gap is the concept of setting up a network that's totally separated or isolated physically and logically from other networks. The common use is to define a network that has no connection to the internet or outside world. There is a common goal to isolate most of the safety critical assets from the internet. For example, it's common that cell-level systems like signaling components would be hosted on a separate network that has no internet interface. But the reality is that we often see that there is no air gap provided. This is because of things like what we could see here in the slide, which is a mistaken physical connection. And looking at that slide, I'm not sure if anybody is able to actually trace the connectivity in the mess that's actually provided in the slide. It can also be because of remote support. With the last couple of years of COVID, meaning that we actually need remote support, this has been rising. In many cases, systems are still mistakenly thought of as isolated and therefore not exposed to cyber attacks. That makes the cyber threat even more dangerous. When you're actually sure there is no threat, you're not going to look for it, let alone try and protect yourself from it. And the consequences to that can be huge to service availability and safety, depending on the type of attack. In the best case, you may have a denial of service attack taking out your network. In the worst case, you may have safety impacts like collisions and train derailment. So let's talk now about attacks coming from insider threats. If we remember, we've discussed unsatisfied employees. Also think about third-party people working your facilities, cleaning team, air conditioning team, various operators, maintainers. Those people can actually be an insider threat. They're inside our network. In the example here, in this slide, an operator in the OCC has high-level permissions. So let's say he has admin privileges necessary for him to perform his day-to-day activities and operating the trains. The operator can be a malicious entity. For example, an employee is not happy with his job or his managers. The operator could also be the most dedicated and loyal employee and happy, and still cause a disruption to critical systems, not deliberately, through mistakes that he made because he has these privileges. So what can the impact of actions such as malicious ones or non-deliberate ones from the operator have to the business? So insiders can actually then create extensive damage. A typical example of this, it's a known example, is an IT professional who was fired by Canadian Pacific Railway. He was unhappy. He went in, he deleted key permissions, passwords and files in the network hardware, and it resulted in multiple outages across the Canadian Pacific Railway network. He was actually then charged and sent to prison for that hack. It may look as though we can do nothing to protect ourselves from an attack. However, there are things that can be done to lower the likelihood that such an attack would happen and lower the impact once an attack is executed. One of the key operating procedures for mitigation is to know that you're under attack. And note, this applies to all cybersecurity attacks mentioned in the presentation. If you believe that your network is safe and you're not actually looking to see if you're under attack, you don't know you're under attack, it is a problem. So the main aim of a cybersecurity organization is to ensure that you know you're under attack and to be able to take measures to quickly mitigate the impact of any attack.
Yeah, thank you, Yu. I would like to take two examples of attacks, and what we are seeing here on the screen is also a regular setup of a rolling stock and a locomotive. And let's think about the wireless networks that we have on a rolling stock. One of them is the passengers network. I mean, it's there because we want it. It's a service that we want to give to our customers or passengers. And also the train have multiple possibility of wireless networks for connecting to the management system, for giving its location and such. So think about what an attacker can do. Sitting as a regular passenger, he just bought his ticket and sit in one of the cars with his laptop on his lap and not connecting to the Wi-Fi network. And I mean, an hacker, and as I told in the beginning, hackers are players. Okay, they will just scan and see what is around them. But if it was an attacker, we will call that reconnaissance. I mean, he wants to know what is around the network. Maybe it's not only the passenger network with a Wi-Fi to the internet outside. Maybe he wants to see what are the security disposition around, and maybe he wants to know which equipment is hosting the network. But then he can come back another time with prepared tools after doing this reconnaissance, and he will try multiple techniques to exit the passenger network and try to move on to more attractive places for his attack. And as the slide is called, the title is lack of segmentation. Segmentation is when you're taking a network and separate different assets based on different criteria, because you don't want these assets to talk together, but they're supposed to be on the same network. One of the things that we can see on rolling stocks, and most of the rolling stocks that are running now, they were not designed in the last 5 years. They're much more older, and we can see that not all the time we're going to have a segmentation and separation between the different wireless systems and the network inside the rolling stock. So in the less dangerous case, maybe this passenger will be able to mess with the car passenger information, okay, and just writing some dirt about the company, or maybe scary people, or maybe he will mess with the door opening automatic system, okay. But in the worst case, he can maybe jump from the passenger network to the inner network of the locomotive, and then find systems that are threatening the rolling stock driving. Okay, so all of these possibilities are in front of him if we are not designing the rolling stock with the proper setup and the proper segmentation of the networks, and if we are not maybe checking, monitoring, and keep this environment secure. So another attack that will in fact impact the train by itself and the rolling stocks is an example of exploiting wireless communication channels that the train uses. There are a lot of them, and one of the de facto standards for these channels is GSMR, based on the GSM cellular communication system. We can find it in Europe all over. I'm sure that we will find some also in Australia, and we can run a whole webinar talking about GSM and GSMR technology, and the multiple attacks that we saw for the last 20, maybe even 30 years, because GSM is pretty old technology. But let's take a look at one single use case that is oriented to the train management system or the ETCS technology. What we can see on the right of the slide is the RBC, the Radio Block Center, which is the entity that is responsible to send messages to the rolling stocks. And one of those messengers is called MA, or Movement Authority, and it's transmitted from this Radio Block Center over the GSMR radio channel to the rolling stock onboard unit. This movement authority message instructs the train how to drive. Let's say, for an example, the message will be for the next kilometer, you can drive at a speed of 200 kilometers per hour. Think about the attacker that can hack this RBC and have a presence inside, and also take his hands over the encryption keys. And this attacker can now craft his own message, his own MA message, as a malicious movement authority. And let's say, hey, train, for the next kilometer, now you can run at 320 kilometers per hour. And this can cause a derailment or maybe impact and a severe safety incident. I mean, think about the fail-safe systems. They won't get out because the message was a genuine message, a good message from the right entity in the network. And so there's nothing to be afraid of. Without getting into further technical details, because there is a lot to understand if you want to craft such an attack, I think it should be known that an attacker doesn't need to have a full control inside the network to achieve this attack. He can also impersonate one of those radio block center and send bogus movement authority message just to create a denial of service, or maybe if you have much more skill, also to send a bogus movement authority message. So if you are much more familiar with CBTC systems, and some of them are running on Wi-Fi wireless technology, you can also think about the same scenario in other wireless channels. So I think we talk about multiple attacks and give you a taste of what an attacker can do inside a railway network. And what we will start now with you is talking about what can be the mitigations and what is the regulations around the railway world.
Okay, well, so we've now described cybersecurity attacks. So now we're going to talk about what we can do to protect ourselves. This includes looking at regulations for cybersecurity. So in looking at this slide, you can see there are a number of regulations which are available worldwide. And you see this from the slide, and it's including American, Asian, Australian, etc. In the railway industry, there is a new Senelec standard. So up until now, we've been dealing with 50126, 50128, 50129. There's a new Senelec standard that was created in May 2021, which is EN 50701. So this section is going to describe this standard and its usage to address the issues of cybersecurity in railway applications. EN 50701 joined the Senelec family in May 2021 to address the issues of cybersecurity in railway applications. It is based around the use of IEC 62443 and ISO 27001, where IEC 62443 is a standard for industrial communication networks, including to provide IT security for networks and systems. So the standard refers to information for implementing electronically secure industrial automation and control system, IACS. ISO 27001 is a standard for information technology covering security techniques for information security management systems. So the standard refers to information for implementing an information security management system. Both standards can be used together in the sense that 27001 can help protect the information that's used to implement an IACS and ensure the development process is effective in implementing security practices that are defined in IEC 62443. With regards to the other Senelec standards, as I said, 50701 is a new Senelec. It is actually compatible and consistent with EN 50126 when it's applied to a system under consideration. 50701 details how cybersecurity can be managed in an EN 50126 RAMS lifecycle, and it specifies the cybersecurity activities that need to be performed for the 50126 phases. It also aligns with 50129, which, as we know, is related to safety cases, and it details how security analysis are actually included within our safety case. So 50701 is saying that if a system is compliant to the standard, then it's demonstrated as been state-of-the-art for cybersecurity. So in terms of the risk assessment for 50701, 50701 describes a 4-step risk assessment process, and this is going to be covered by Yaniv in subsequent slides. So step 1 is looking for the identification of an SUC or a system under consideration. So an SUC is a collection of assets that are needed to provide the railway application functionality. It consists of one or more zones or related conduits, where a conduit is a logical grouping of communication channels connecting two or more zones. And a zone is a grouping of logical or physical assets based upon risk or other criteria such as criticality of assets, operational functions, logical location, etc. Step number 2 is then looking at a high-level security risk assessment. Step number 3 is actually then partitioning the SUC into various zones and conduits. And step number 4 is performing the detailed cybersecurity risk assessment for each zones and conduits. So Yaniv will now take us through the various steps.
Yes, so the first step is the identification of the SOC or SUC. And as you heard from this is the acronym for System Under Consideration. A SUC is a consistent part of the railway system, which can be understood as a system of nested system. When you approaching the risk assessment, each one of your subsystems can be a SUC. I mean, a SUC can be a whole network, a whole railway network, but it can also be just a small part of this network. Let's say if you are replacing the fare collecting system, this is a system that can be under consideration, because each time that you are changing one of the systems, you should do a risk assessment before you are installing that inside your critical infrastructure. So any cybersecurity threat may endanger the correct execution of the functionality of the system under consideration, always of the integrity of the safety-related functions. And so you will want to prepare your risk assessment. The identification of the system under consideration is meaning that you should divide, you should understand what are the functions of the system. You should prepare a list of assets, and 5701 give you suggestions about how to divide your assets in some asset model. The asset model can be based on physical location, physical areas, and also on functional criticality level, meaning I can look at the signaling assets and the command and control assets and the comfort assets inside the network, but also if they are inside the rolling stock or at the station or on the wayside. The result of this part of the risk assessment is the definition of the system under consideration. Most of the time is a network diagram, let's say like the one we're seeing on the screen, and the list of assets. And now you can jump to the next part, which is the high-level risk assessment. The first step for the risk assessment is to understand what will be the impact. So for each asset that we previously identified, we need to understand what are the functions that they are supporting, okay? And when you understand what is the function they are supporting, you can understand what are the consequences of losing maybe the integrity of this asset or the availability of this asset. Okay, the impact evaluation should measure the worst global impact in case of loss of the asset properties. The global impact shall be evaluated not only at the business level, but also at the environmental level, the human impact level, and maybe societal level. The next part will be to perform a likelihood assessment. So I'm sure all of you that are in the business of cybersecurity or safety know those kind of metrics, because this is how you assess what is the likelihood and the impact of a threat. And what you can see here is a table with multiple scores. And now we need to understand what is the likelihood of a threat, because in cybersecurity, we are hearing all the time about new vulnerability in some system, some network, some operating system. That doesn't mean that for an attacker, this is very easy for him to use it, because in our line of business, we are talking about vulnerabilities, which is the way someone can misuse a program or a system. But the next part is to do an exploit, meaning there can be a super high 0-day vulnerability just revealed this morning, but for an attacker to use it, he will need to prepare an exploit that is really complicated. So the likelihood of using this vulnerability is pretty low. Also think about the most old workstation that you have on your network running a Windows XP from 20 years ago, no security updates, it is pretty vulnerable. But if it is inside the most secure location inside the OCC, beyond some doors and in some closed, segregated part of the network, the likelihood for the attacker to access this workstation, even if it is really attractive for him, it is also low. So the likelihood will be low. The final part of the risk assessment will be these metrics and understand what is the highest, what are the risks for each threats on each asset. And now, what you're going to do at the risk assessment is the part that I like the most, because it is really railway oriented, although it came from the IEC 62443, but it is adapted to the railway environment. And it is partitioning or defining all of your system into zones and conduits. A zone is a partition of the assets, okay, that you will decide to group based on categories. And a conduit is each time that two zones will have a communication channel, you're going to need to define this conduit. And that means that all assets in the same zone and all the data in the same conduit will need to share the same cybersecurity requirement. So the objective for grouping these assets into zone and conduits is to identify the assets that share the most common security requirements and group them to share the mitigation. The 5701 gives us some example rules to how to prepare your zoning, meaning business assets like IT systems and control assets like the OT systems shall be in different zones. Safety-related assets maybe will be in a separate zone, okay? And asset that you are connecting temporarily. If you remember that we talk, you and I, we refer to the technicians that are running around your facilities with laptops. Maybe this is supposed to be a separate zone. And when you finish this part of the risk assessment, you're going to have a diagram and also a list of zone and conduits. And now you're going to need to set to each one of them what we call a security level. A security level, this is maybe familiar to you because this is much more aligned to the safety levels of the network. And this came from the IEC 62443 standards. And there are basically 4 levels of security. I mean, there is a level 0, which means this zone have not at all security issues, and you don't need to make any protection. I think nowadays this is a pretty naive possibility, and I don't think that any one of the assets on a railway network can be safety level, security level 0. So that leaves us with the 4 that you can see on the screens. They are escalating based on the capability of the threat actor, based on the effort they want to achieve. And if you remember that we talked about APTs a few slides before, and about a national entity that want to harm another country because of a political reason. I think if you're looking at the SL4, which is the security level 4, protection against international attacks with advanced means, more than average resources, system-specific skills, and high motivation. In cybersecurity, motivation, it's even more important than the resources and the skill that you have, because with the time that you can invest on your target, you will find a way to breach. There is always a possibility to breach. And when you're finishing your risk assessment with these security levels, you are ready to go to the next part, which is the detailed risk assessment, and it will give you a really good overview about your assets and how to protect them. And then you can start to choose what will be the security controls to use on your network.
Okay, so how do we identify current threats? How do we know what attacks are going to happen? There are multiple government agencies that are working on identification of threats, as can be seen from this slide. So they identify threats together with threat explanation and describe countermeasures. Those agencies issue reports on APT's activities, on specific malware, on specific industry challenges. They also issue alerts based on intelligence. So examples of these are ACSC, which is the Australian Cybersecurity Centre. It provides the Australian government's backing to help improve cybersecurity. They monitor threats across the globe 24 hours a day, and they provide updated information and alerts on threats and countermeasures to anyone who's registered. ACSC provides an information and alert service to individuals and families, as well as businesses and other organisations. For example, one of our panel members, Chris Menon, in his government role, he actually then receives regular ACSC reports on possible threats to actually use in his job. As the other organisations, ENISA is the European Union Agency for Cybersecurity, looking at cybersecurity across Europe. It follows EU cybersecurity acts and contributes to EU cybersecurity policy to help Europe to be prepared for cyber attacks. Also encourages cooperation between cybersecurity stakeholders in Europe and in various member states. CISA, which is a Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, is an agency set up to support American critical infrastructure. So there are multiple government agencies that are working on identification of threats, together with threat explanations and described countermeasures. Now on to MITRE ATT&CK. MITRE ATT&CK is a globally accessible knowledge base of adversary tactics and techniques based on real-world observations. The attack knowledge database is used as a foundation for the development of specific threat models and methodologies in private sector, government, and in the cybersecurity product and service community. You can see on the slide there is a MITRE matrix that actually contains techniques and tactics an attacker is going to be using to perform an attack. The matrix is used to communicate between vendors and customers and between various cybersecurity professionals to actually explain incidents. monitor, maintain, and update this matrix based on intelligence on known attacks and research. Most of the world's vendors actually then contribute to this MITRE attack matrix. Threat intelligence. So how do the hackers get intelligence? If we take threat intelligence, information is available for hackers online and in the dark web. And this includes information on proprietary technology that you may believe that no one else knows about. A typical example that I found is in a recent published example in the Indian Railways. There were more than 1 million stolen records, including all employees' details, passwords, accounts, etc., for sale for the large price of $137. If you're looking for tools, there's a nice example of a tool that both hackers and cybersecurity personnel use is Shodan. Shodan is a search engine that allows users to search for various types of servers connected to the internet. It provides a comprehensive report on all exposed services that are available, including service versions. And this allows hackers then to know the services that are open, the versions that are open, and to have knowledge of vulnerabilities in that service and in service version, and allows them to actually then construct a hacking attack. So what support what support does the railway industry need? We've identified various threats and attacks, and we've described the use of standards to help identify, categorize, and mitigate threats. So what can we do now? In the presentation, we've clearly shown that rail is clearly a target, both worldwide and Australia. The threats to rail are growing. These are financial, reputational, service affecting, and in the worst case, safety affecting on our railway networks. We've shown the impact of cybersecurity attacks, and we've asked the audience the questions as to whether their systems and infrastructure are ready for an attack, and if you know you're being attacked. We've described the unique complexity and distributed environment in the railway systems, and we've shown why this is hard to defend. We've shown different types of attacks that can be conducted in railway systems, and we've described processes and identification of mitigation of threats using the guidance in EN 50701, the latest Synilex standard. Finally, we've identified agencies that provide identification of current threats. So going back to an earlier slide, we asked some questions. And question one was, how many assets do you actually have? And in most network, the number of assets are very high, and it gives an attacker a large number of assets to look at. Question number two is, can you monitor your assets? So quite often the answer, well, nearly always the answer is yes, but for operation and maintenance, using things like SCADA systems. So we can operate, we can maintain, we can see our assets are actually then functioning correctly, but we don't actually then monitor them for issues of cybersecurity. Are there threats on these assets? Do we know? Question three, we asked, are you able to manage your asset communications? Again, often the answer is yes for operations and maintenance, but again, not for addressing issues of cybersecurity. Can we actually then see threats on communication channels? The answer is probably no. Question four, we asked, when was the last time you actually scanned your network for vulnerabilities? So in a lot of networks, the answer is unfortunately never, or at the very best, rarely. We tend to actually then put in assets. We tend to operate and maintain them. Do we ever scan them? Do we ever do updates? No. So there is a tendency to install systems into the network. We also put in things that we believe are air-gapped, and then we monitor the operation of these. We're not looking in our networks for cybersecurity issues on any of these assets. So question five, we asked you, how do you monitor or control new assets? How are you performing asset management? How sure are we that there are no cybersecurity vulnerabilities in the assets that we're procuring and installing in our network? Very often it is just plug and play into our network, with the same points above being that we're monitoring these assets for operational correctness, but not for cybersecurity. So in summing up then for the presentation, we look at the current growth of railway attacks, and we believe the railway industry has to, firstly, look at all current systems that you've got out there, also new systems that you're deploying. We need to perform risk assessments to determine, are there vulnerabilities in our systems? We need to perform updates to operating systems and software where this is possible, noting that what Yaniv said earlier on, this isn't always possible when we've got high SIL levels where we can't do patches. Looking at network traffic for threat signatures. So often the only way to deal with Salesforce systems that we can't actually then modify, so we can't go on and place software onto these machines, is often to actually then look at the network for various threat signatures to determine that they're being attacked. We need to look at performing network hardening to develop suitable networks. So we should be using demilitarized zones, firewalls, intrusion detection, intrusion prevention, SOCs, etc. We should be looking for compliance to international standards for cybersecurity. We need to ensure that you have a cybersecurity team to address ongoing threats and any active threats that are actually then passed on by agencies as possible attacks. Lastly, I'd say we need to actually ensure that there's suitable training for all staff with regards to cybersecurity, noting that all staff have a duty of care with regards to cybersecurity. I've actually personally seen people opening emails that have viruses and plugging in USB sticks with viruses. Has to be training on personnel to actually then know about cybersecurity and deal with it. As I said, everybody has a duty of care with regard to cybersecurity. So the main thing to learn from this presentation is we must know that we're being attacked. We must harden, we must train. We must know the ways, we must know that we're being attacked, and we must know ways to mitigate the attack. So just doing a quick profile of the presenters and their companies before I hand over to Yaniv for the final word, and then we'll move on to the panel. So Certifier are one of the largest and well-known independent certification and safety companies with offices and projects worldwide. Basically, through our independent safety assessments that we've been performing through the world, we've been tasked over the past years with performing assessments of cybersecurity deliverables and looking at the effect on safety. The Certifier organisation now has a parallel focus worldwide on providing cybersecurity consultancy services and utilising internal cybersecurity experience that we have worldwide. And we're enhancing this by joining forces with various companies to help provide ranges of cybersecurity services across the world. The focus of Certifier in this market is also intended to cover multiple domains. It isn't just railway. So next up is SAL Safety and Cybersecurity, which shortens to SALSC. So they're represented on the panel today by Chris Menon, who is a cybersecurity advisor and consultant for SALSC. Chris has got about 18 years of experience in cybersecurity, mainly in the defence domain, and he's been providing cybersecurity courses at various Australian universities. So he's got experience and training in this area. Chris and his college at SALSC, again, are similar to Certifier. They're providing cybersecurity consultancy services across multiple domains, and they're looking to provide support, hopefully with Certifier within this area. So the final word goes then over to Yaniv from Silas. So Yaniv, I just say, do you have any thoughts on the final summary slide? And can you say some words about Silas before we close the presentation?
I think you just touched the most important things that we wanted to share with the audience. And the last point that you gave about the fact that we need to know what is going on inside our network and be able to understand what are the changes, and if something is happening, it's even critical. Here at Silus, we are developing a security solution called Silus One, which is the first worldwide dedicated solution for railway networks only. That's what we do. We are cyber people and also railway people. And one of our main features is to give the client network visibility right after the install of the product. And of course, we understood that that's not enough. A security product, even if it's great, it's not enough. So we have also a services group, which I'm part of, and we are giving cybersecurity consultancy and services and training for clients all over the world, for operators and APCs. And we are also now joint forces with Certifier to provide a full range of cybersecurity services for projects and companies in Australia and all over the world. That's for us.
Thank you, and a huge thank you for our speakers on those brilliant presentations. I'm going to move things right along. We've had so many questions, so if we aren't able to answer all these questions, which we won't be able to in the time we have, our speakers are going to answer them later, and we'll be sending those out in an email on Monday morning. So without further ado, a question to Chris, and this is coming in from Edward, and Edward's in Thailand. Good afternoon to you. Chris, you have a lot of experience in non-railway domains, including lecturing on the subject. What are your thoughts on how things like your experience outside of rail can be brought into rail? Do you see much synergy? Thanks, Chris.
Thanks for that. So with the security department and cybersecurity in general, there's two sort of main focuses that we have. We have the assessing the threat to the organization, the company, in a consultant doing that specific company. And then we've also got mitigation those risks. Each industry has their specific threats associated to them. So finance threats will be different to, say, railway threats. Health will have other threats as well. And so as a consultant, I assess those risks specifically to that organization. And the big point of that report is to how quick can we get you to not only find that breach or attack, how do we get you to respond to that, recover, and then hand on. So I do have experience, not specifically in railway, however, it is a skill that can be used over many domains. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Over to you, Yaniv. Question from Jason. Yaniv, starting with you and then on to Hugh. Are attacks on the network a common occurrence?
Thank you, Amanda. We can answer that by two categories. The attacks reconnaissance, which is the first part that a hacker will try to do, meaning he will try to scan your network, try to understand what is open, what is easy to prey on. There are a lot of that. I can tell you that we are seeing our clients, every one of them will have external VPN for, let's say, remote maintenance or just for remote access for the workers. They are all the time scanned and checked by hackers all over the world. I mean, even clients here from Israel, we find them having people trying to enter from crazy places around the world. But did we find a lot? Are we seeing a lot of attacks like directly? That's a complicated one because you can only answer that if you know that you are under attack. And I remember the slide by you in the presentation. So there are a lot of attacks all over organizations in the world. This is rising for the last 2 decades. It's also going on railway networks. Is it the same amount of attacks on the external IT network? or on the internal OT operational network, I can tell you for sure, but I guess there are a lot of.
Thanks. Hugh, do you want to just comment on that too?
Yeah, following on from what Yaniv said, yep, there is quite a lot of reconnaissance that's actually seen. When you've seen in the slides, there are a number of attacks worldwide, and it is beginning to, as we showed, it's beginning to happen more in Australia. A lot of the attacks tend to be ransomware, as we've seen in the slide for Germany. It's an easy target to actually then take a railway out, or to actually kill a ticketing system or a billing system to actually then make some money. There doesn't seem to be as many attacks on the sort of safety domain, though. But there does seem to be things like denial of service and ransomware, and it is growing. And as I showed in one of the slides, we can actually then see there is some examples of this in Australia as well at the moment.
Thanks for that, Hugh. Over to Mark. Mark sent a question in, starting with Yaniv, and maybe Hugh and Chris, you can also comment. Mark's in New South Wales and is asking you, what are your thoughts concerning the convergence of cybersecurity with other domains of security, such as personnel and physical security? Yaniv?
Yeah. I think there's a great need for convergence. I think especially in a railway network, you got so much facilities unmanned. You got a station, a train station or a depot. It's not a defense contractor or a facility. So this is not a place super guarded with a ton of people and extra security and patrols all over the time. So you have a lot of sweet spots where an attacker can go by himself or use someone else to get inside the facility and get physical access to one of the computers, to one of the network ports. There are a lot of equipment easily buyable online, like small boxes that you can put and get some tapping access to network. And that's one of the things that I am really worried about, because this is the easiest way for an attacker to get inside your network. And if you remember the slides that you presented, I guess an hour ago, when an attacker is inside your network, it is pretty much more complicated to mitigate that. So yes, I think physical security is a big part of the cybersecurity, and I think that physical security operation and cybersecurity operation needs to at least talk together at the same organization.
Thanks, Yaniv. And Hugh or Chris, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah.
And we did have a question from Steve in South Australia, who just takes that question out to outer regions on track to prevent infiltration onto the networks. Hugh?
Yeah, I mean, I would very much agree with what Yaniv has said. I mean, and more in the olden days, a lot of it would be related more to physical security. But now there is Wi-Fi, there is more ease of access, including, as we discussed, remote access into networks for maintenance. That sort of bypasses the physical security that you may actually then have in your control center or wherever. So yeah, but there is still the need for physical security as well. One of the things I think Yaniv was then saying about people plugging in boxes, if you actually look on the internet, there are a number of things like that you can actually then plug in boxes, plug in cables that actually look like USB cables that are actually then transmitters. So you can actually then physically get into an operations center and actually then do sort of key logging. And it's amazing how many of these tools are actually then available very easily on the internet.
Chris, do you have anything to add?
I agree with the rest of the panel. I will mention, though, when we are conducting these assessments, we usually put them into 4 categories. And so we've got physical, which we've talked about. We've got the technical. So what technical technologies or implementations has the company or organisation implemented? We've got the governance piece. Governance piece is what policies are required. Do we have policies? And then the culture, and that covers the personnel. Do people know what they should and shouldn't be able to do on the network, what they should or shouldn't be doing around the workplace? And so we tend to find that they all tie in together. And so, I just thought I'd bring that one up.
Thanks for that. We've had a great question that's come in from Thomas. Good afternoon to you, asking, starting with you, Yaniv, and then Hugh. How would you rate the preparedness of the Australian rail industry operators to fight off a cyber attack? Yaniv.
This is a good question. I'm not that familiar with the Australian railway operators. From my little experience with the country, I know that there's a lot of people that are trying to keep up with the new standards and try to implement cybersecurity. And I know that the Australian government and the cyber agency, they are doing a quite lot of work. But maybe you can answer that better than me about the operators' readiness.
Hugh.
Yeah, I think in this area it is very early and it's starting to grow. If you remember one of the slides, we actually then talked about a report in New South Wales where it was reported that there was a belief that Sydney trains and transport for New South Wales were not actually then very well prepared for cyber attacks. I believe it's very early in railway, although it's good to actually see. I mean, I'm living in Victoria. It's good to see things like V-Line and Metro starting to actually then put together cyber teams and to actually then address cyber issues. And this is happening as well in things like Metro Tunnel Project and the Airport Project, where they're starting to actually then take cyber security seriously, develop cyber security plans, and to actually then implement them. It is very early, though. If you compare it to, I mean, something that Chris, I can pass it on to Chris after this, but Chris could probably tell you then how prepared other industries are as opposed to rail. But I believe rail is very early.
Chris, do you want to comment?
With the industries that I've worked on, there's definitely standards across the board. Talking with business continuity plans, disaster recovery plans, and incident response plans. I think every organisation thinks that they're alone, though, in building that capability of cybersecurity. And so, even though an organisation might be behind, there are obviously ways that we can increase that.
Thanks, Chris. We've had a question that's come in from the US. And the question is, this is direct to Yaniv and then to Hugh, asking, is the current standard design considering cybersecurity aspects for the railway renewal in Australia? And that's coming from George. Yaniv.
Yeah, I guess George is talking about the 5701 that we were talking about during the presentation. So I think the good thing about this standard is that is giving, along with all of the guidelines, is giving to the cybersecurity managers and experts the good life cycle to pursue in order to starting a renewal project or maybe enhance the security in a already brownfield railway lines. So I guess that if you want to improve cybersecurity, you can start from the point that you have where you're ready. I mean, in the life cycle of the 5701, and continue from there. I guess it is really, from this point of view, this is pretty agile and suitable for most of the new project and railway renewal also, I guess, in Australia.
Thanks. Do you want to comment, Hugh, quickly or move on?
Yeah. I would just say that again. I mean, I sort of agree with Yaniv. What we discussed earlier is cybersecurity is beginning to grow. You know, as I said, from the experience that I'm seeing in Victoria, it is beginning to actually then grow within Australia, particularly in Victoria. I can see it growing in Victoria.
Thanks for that. And talking about Victoria, we had a question coming from Michael, who was asking, to what extent are fundamental processes like configuration control more important with cybersecurity? Maybe, Yaniv, you can kick off with that one.
Yeah, so configuration management, this is an essential part of every IT cybersecurity plan, but in our context, it is really much more important. I can tell you that one of the most complicated thing for railway network administrators is to manage all of the assets that they have inside the network. So the next part is to understand what is the configuration. So the configuration management in cybersecurity is really essential because it will help you to know what you need to, let's say, the patching management, okay, for all of the vulnerabilities and all of the new version of softwares. So if you are not able to manage what is the current configuration, you cannot know what is your next steps. And also, it is really important to detect anomalies. So if I take an example from our product, Asilos, one of the most important features is to detect changes in the network behavior. And the way to do that is to know and understand what are the current configuration of the network, what are the assets that's supposed to be talking and communicate on this network, and how they are supposed to do it. And if you see a slight change that wasn't supposed to be there, it can be an anomaly. And an anomaly can be the start to understand that you're under attack. So yes, configuration control is really, really important, also in cybersecurity.
Thanks for that. And I just want to stay with you, Yaniv, because we've had a question that's come in from Daniel. Good afternoon to you, asking, you mentioned the need to ensure systems are patched, updated with respect to latest software and firmware revisions. What advice do you offer to balance the need to ensure safe systems that don't embrace updating with that of security where updates are advocated? Yaniv, and then Hugh.
I cannot tell anyone to skip software and firmware updates because this is the core of how you deal with cybersecurity changes, and there are a lot of cybersecurity changes. Every day you got a new patch or maybe a new vulnerability. So I cannot tell to skip that. And I know this is really, really complicated for railway operators because of the safety levels and the maintenance windows that are not always available. But the way to mitigate that and to deal with this is to understand where are your most complicated parts, most complicated assets to update and manage, and then put extra defense around that. It can be, let's say, separate or put an extra layer of defense around some system that you cannot patch. And it can be also add an extra level of detection and monitoring to understand that this is an asset that I cannot patch, and I know there is vulnerable to some attacks. So let's wait and see if someone is trying to reach for that and be able to mitigate that right away. That's what I'm thinking.
Thank you. Question coming from Chris, and I might start with you on this one, asking, there needs to be a better approach to maintenance windows for cybersecurity patching. Just like locomotive tracks have maintenance windows, the same is needed for telecommunications, networks, and endpoints. Sort of not a question, but do you want to comment on that, Hugh?
Well, in terms of cybersecurity patching, going back to what Yannick was talking then about configuration management. Configuration management itself is obviously a big topic. You have to actually know what you're actually then deploying. You have to be able to actually then ensure that you're installing patches to actually then manage the various cybersecurity attacks. Now, one of the things we discussed earlier on during the presentation was in terms of the patching, you have problems depending on the skill levels with patching. And I know Silas have actually then got a product that actually then monitors for threats across network on that. One of the other things about having being on top of configuration is when you're on top of the configuration, you can actually then detect for changes actually made to a configuration to know whether or not some attacker has actually gone on and made changes. So you need to really be on top of the configuration that you're deploying. But configuration and patching itself then does become a problem for SIL levels, and for that there has to be other ways to actually then determine that it's under attack. You can determine the configuration has not changed, but you cannot put software on there depending on the SIL level, and therefore you have to actually know it's under attack using other methods like monitoring for attack vectors across networks.
Thank you. Thanks, Hugh. And we are going to have to finish on this question. And I do apologise, but we will come back on Monday with answers to all your questions. Thank you very much. Ross in WA is a question to finish on with you, Chris. What are your top 3 tips to improve cyber security? I'm in local government.
That's a great question. Without knowing the actual organisation itself, we've mentioned in the presentation, we mentioned on the panel, the awareness training for users and administrators into the network is absolutely critical. That can be from a campaign for a phishing email and just have it come up with, you've been attacked, nothing that's detrimental, of course, and just seeing that impact for the users themselves. I've found that discussions are also another good a good way to actually run through activities. So I mentioned before incident response and the disaster recovery plan. Companies and organizations that I've seen have this documentation. They know it exists, but they've never actually tested it. And so doing those dry runs of this incredibly important documentation is super important. And then I'd also go through the ACSC. We've talked about that today, the top 8. They're the most common ways that a breach occurred onto a system, and so I would recommend going through those ones without actually knowing the organisation itself. Thanks.
Thanks, Chris. So all the time we have for today. Please join me once again in thanking Hugh Hunter, Yaniv Mallet and Chris Menon for their time and input. I'd also like to thank Engineers Australia's new industry partner, Certifa, for all their support. As always, we're looking for your feedback. How can we improve, plan future sessions? So if you could quickly complete the short feedback form, which is linked in the description box below. Thank you again for joining us, and we hope to see you at our next Thought Leaders event. Good afternoon.